Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please look us up on your favorite podcast app, subscribe, like, and share so that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to further support us, visit patreon.com/speakingout and check out the different rewards. You'll find exclusive rewards if you sign up as a patron of the podcast. Thank you for your support, and let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast. Thank you again to our patrons who make the podcast possible. We invite you to sign up as a patron at patreon.com/speakingout. Look at the different tiers, see what ails you, and sign up and join.
We have some great tiers available, and I think we have a little bit of something for everyone, really.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to talk about detecting deception. We try to give you guys as many practical things as we can. And I thought we never really did something on how you detect deception, and It's such an important skill to have. And so I was searching, and I found somebody who worked for the FBI. It was a phenomenal video on detecting deception by a top profiler for the FBI. And I'm watching this video and I'm like, he looks really familiar. And then I realized, well, it was Jim Clemente. Jim Clemente spoke here locally. Man, this was several years ago. This is probably 7-8 years ago. And I got the chance to meet Jim Clemente.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, he was absolutely phenomenal. And, you know, I would probably credit him in large part for why my research started going in that direction of profiling people, abusers, and really trying to get into their mind.
I did not meet Mr. Clemente, by the way. I did not go to that particular training that Jimmy went to. I believe it's clicking with me now, that one out at Seven Springs.
Yeah, out at Seven Springs Ski Resort. Yeah.
But I have watched Mr. Clemente on video, and he is incredible.
Yeah, he's
truly incredible.
Good at what he does. Yeah. So I'm going to kind of talk through this video and some of the things that Jim said in this video. We'll put a link to the video because obviously you're going to glean more, I think, from that. But we can kind of unpack some of the things that he says. But he worked for the Criminal Behavior Analyst Department of the FBI. And so that's kind of a big umbrella for criminal profiling. So they have people who that's their job is just criminal profiling. Mm-hmm. Active listening. They have an active listening department. Interview and interrogation, investigative interviews, and then deception detection. And so deception detection is what he talked about. So that one category under this umbrella of the criminal behavior analysis. And it was really fascinating. So he said these are the three big areas. So these are the things that they're looking for. One is fight or flight. So he said fight or flight, whenever we're nervous and we're not confident in something and you know, we're extremely stressed out, you get decreased salivation. So they look for people who keep, you know, nervously taking sips of water, increased
dry mouth. I thought that, you know, everything he went down the line and was saying, thought, isn't that true? Because he said when we're in that fight or flight, we are ready to take off, and our body responds in that way.
Exactly right. You have increased heartbeat, adrenaline that goes to the fingers and the toes because that's that flight response. Right. Your body is actively the primitive part of your body is ready to take off and run faster than you can normally run. And you know, you see the people that get super strength when they lift cars off of people and you know, they get this big burst of adrenaline. So he said what's interesting is when somebody's sitting there, that adrenaline's going there, but they don't have a way to release it.
Later on in that video, when the lady stood on her...
Yeah, Jodi Arias. So,
yes, I thought that was fascinating.
He said this is a prime example that while she was sitting there, she seemed calm and collective, although he said when you're watching her, you can tell she's thirsty. She's nervously thirsty. You can kind of see...
Oh, no. Should I put my cup of coffee down?
You can kind of see the fight or flight. And he said as soon as they left, the officer left the interrogation room, that's when she stood on her head, up against the wall. She did an upside down, whatever that was.
It was crazy. She just put her body against the wall. She did a headstand.
Yeah.
And he explained that she had all this wild energy going
And she
to
had
her
nowhere
lips
to go.
and no way to expel that energy.
So that was that release of the adrenaline that was in
Right.
the fingers and the toes.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, really was.
Yeah.
So they look for fight or flight. The next category is cognitive complexity. So he said when people lie, they keep it as simple as possible because it's really hard to maintain all these different narratives all at the same time. So he said, picture it like an onion. And he said, what an interrogator will do, and we can do this too. I mean, you don't have to be somebody who interrogates people. We can do it when we're just asking
Right.
basic questions. If we
Absolutely.
think somebody's lying through their teeth, start digging down through the different layers of that onion. And he said, the very first thing that they lie about will be something about like where they were or what they were doing.
Details.
Right.
They're very skirmish on details. Very, very skirmish on giving any kind of time frame. Yeah, sometime in the morning.
Yeah,
What
it's
time?
very vague, very broad.
Very vague,
Yeah.
yes.
So the example he gave, he showed an interrogation where this guy said, he was guilty of murder, and they said, "Well, what were you doing that day?" He said, "Playing video games." And the detective said, "All day?" "Yep, literally all day." And he responded with, "I literally played games all day."
Yeah.
Well, obviously he's lying through his teeth.
What games? What
Exactly
time?
right.
Exactly.
He wasn't given any
Wasn't-
timestamps.
No,
So
nothing.
this cognitive complexity, once you begin peeling through those layers, he said that's when you really get in there and you start digging and prying. And he said, and then you ask other people because they're not expecting you to ask other people. And so if you don't get corroborating evidence, he said, then they really fall apart pretty quickly. And I thought that was fascinating.
As I thought about the abuser and how true this is with an abuser, they're very not detailed.
Yep.
Don't give any details, but they're picking constantly at others to get every detail of your life. Thank you. Thank you.
Granny's dropping things
I
here.
dropped my paper.
He said too, with the cognitive complexity, people lie using only two senses, what they see and what they hear. They don't talk about smells, and they don't talk about what
Another
what they felt,
interesting
and
thing.
they only talk about things through those two senses, what they see and what they hear, because the other ones are such complex emotions that are tied to our senses.
Right. I thought that was really fascinating when he said about they don't talk about touch or smell. I thought, I deal with grief a lot, and parents will say when one of the biggest triggers of child loss is that smell.
Yeah.
Maybe the smell of their child coming in from outdoors playing, their child's hair, their child. We each have a distinctive
Even abuse
smell.
survivors,
Oh, yeah.
smells often
Smell
is the first
is
thing that'll
high
trigger.
on the
Or
scale. Right.
audio will too, but probably more than any other sense is that sense of smell.
Sense of smell,
That really
aftershave
brings
that
you back.
someone wore, or the perfume. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in this case, the guilty person makes no mention of smell.
Nope.
No.
Yep, because it's so complex.
Right.
And to build that lie, it just takes a lot of energy. And then he said perception management. That's a third category under deception detection. Perception management. So in other words, they are constantly trying to figure out, or they just naturally know, how we're going to perceive them if they behave in a certain way or say a certain thing.
Right.
So they're working extra hard to not do those things. And so, for example, he said a lot of people in interrogation, they know that fidgeting is perceived to be that you're lying.
Right.
If you're
Right.
fidgeting with stuff, and sometimes it is, but he said, if you're fidgeting or, grooming hair. He said grooming behaviors,
You
running the
mentioned
fingers
that
through the
several
hair.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah, about
And
yeah.
Jodi Arias did that too.
Right.
So that
Very.
is,
Oh yeah.
that does go along with deception. But perception management, what people do, and he said what you watch for is for people who over exaggerate not doing those things.
Right.
So people who sit perfectly still, but then when you leave the room, then they're all nervously fidgeting.
I thought that
Larry
was
Nassar did that.
Yes, I thought that was incredible. And there have been times when I've talked with people in my job and they'll actually sit on their hands to keep them still. And I'll think that is really weird
Yeah.
to do that. And after hearing this, I thought, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very
Yeah.
much so.
So yeah, being too still, because again, that perception is that people who fidget are lying. And then he said, you listen for verbal clues under perception management, and so they'll say things like, and
Yeah. Yes.
sort of, and kind of, and in other words, they're not confident. Okay, so they're using terminology where they're not confident at all, and you can really pick up on that. And then he mentioned Clinton, and I thought this was a great example.
I loved it.
A
Loved
great
that.
example.
Yes.
He said when Clinton gave his big, huge, aha speech that he was so innocent, he said, I want to say one thing. And he's looking right at the camera when he says it. I want to say one thing. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. So he made those 3 statements to
Right.
set up what he was about to say. And he said, if you're telling the truth, you're not going to say, listen up, listen here. I want to say one thing. You would just make your
You
statement.
don't have to sit. You don't
Right.
have to do
Exactly
any
right.
prepping for it. Right.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So then his statement, again, listening for verbal clues, he said, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. All right, so that woman,
Yeah.
he distances himself from her. He didn't stay with Monica
Won't
Lewinsky.
say her name. Wouldn't say her name.
He didn't stay with my intern.
No.
He said with that woman. And then he said sexual relations, and he said that's omitting truth. So it's a lie by omission. So instead of saying I did not have sexual relations, that automatically applies or assumes that he didn't have any sexual
Right.
contact.
Yes.
So he said, what Jim Clemente said is what he failed to say by omission is that I had sexual activity with her. I just didn't have sexual intercourse with her.
I just shake my head because how well thought out lies have to be. And they are. And when we think of the abuser, when under attack, has a plan of action that is almost concrete all the time. And when we know that, and we know some of these signs of deception and can unrattle that person,
Yeah.
that's when we know we're making progress in this whole prevention of sex abuse, because these abusers are so incredible at lying.
Yeah.
Just incredible liars.
I have a funny story about this because that statement that Clinton made, this was actually kind of planned. So I met another brilliant person who was contracted with the FBI, and on Netflix there's a whole series on Ted Bundy, and Bill Hagmaier is the guy who he's all through that documentary. So Bill Hagmaier is the one who he would go and he would sit and talk with Ted Bundy for hours and hours and hours, and there towards the end. Sometimes it was like 18-hour shifts that he would just sit and talk to Ted Bundy. So I got to meet Bill Hagmaier. In fact, Bill Hagmaier was the keynote speaker, and then I followed him up. And Bill sat, and we had like kind of breakouts, and Bill sat in my session. And after I was done, he came up and I was talking about profiling abusers. Bill Hagmeyer walked up to me and we talked for a good 10, 15 minutes. And he's like, you are so spot on. And he's like, that's impressive.
What an incredible thing to hear, Jimmy, from
It was
someone
really
of
cool.
that stature and intelligence.
It was really
It
cool.
really is. Really. If that's not a positive affirmation of your work
Yeah.
in this field, I don't know what is.
Well,
It
it was pretty
really
cool
is.
because it was a new presentation that I had never done before. That was actually my first time presenting it. And it was on profiling abusers and some of the more subtle things that we look for. So I had never presented it before.
Well,
and I didn't realize when I was
who
doing
he
it
was.
that Bill Hagmeyer was going to be the keynote
I
speaker.
was going to say, how did you keep your calm speaking? I would have been like,
I didn't. No, he
shaking
was
in
super
my
down to earth.
boots.
Nah, he was really cool.
I'll put a plug in at this point for Patreon that we have the training at the $25 tier.
Yep, 25 and
for
up.
abuse in plain sight, and this is incredible work of Jimmy's, and I applaud him for that. I
Yeah, I'm
applaud
using
you.
the same presentations that I used for those trainings.
If you want in on that, you can only get in on that through that $25 tier. The training is absolutely spot on, incredible.
Yeah.
It really is.
But yeah, that's not really my point. The point was that Bill Hagmeyer, he tells this story and he was like, and he didn't reveal who it was, but he said, the FBI called me and they said, we have somebody who, he's accused of inappropriate stuff with an intern, and we have volumes and volumes of recordings, and we want you to listen to it, secret recordings. We want you to listen to it, and you are the best of the best at getting into the minds of people and getting them to confess. We want a confession out of this man. And so he said he's listening to these recordings, and he comes back and he said, I can't get a confession. He said, I'm not even going to try. And they were really upset. And they're like, well, we hired you. We pay you really well because you're the best of the best. You're the whole reason why we pay you so well is because, right, you're the only one who can do this. And he said, not going to get a confession. And they're like, all right, you better explain. He goes, I'm going to do one better. I'm going to get this man to tell the biggest lie on the face of the planet.
Wow.
And I'm not only going to get him to tell a big lie, I'm going to get him to tell a lie where every single person in America is going to know that he's lying through his teeth. And then he leans over the podium and he goes, I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Oh, wow.
So
that's awesome.
Bill Hagmeyer was the one who met with
Wow.
Clinton.
Wow.
And, his confession, of course, Bill Clinton is so arrogant. There's not a chance in the world he was going to do it, and Bill knew it. And so he was like, all right, well, I'll just make him grandiose and make him think he's the, smartest person on the planet.
Best liar in the world.
I thought that was a pretty funny story that he told.
Something? Yes.
Okay, then the other thing under perception management is nonverbal, and those are changes in body language. That occurs when people are lying. So if you see like rapid breathing, and just they're different tells, but they're nonverbal clues where there's changes in body language, where they stiffen up, or like you can watch it with Larry Nassar. I think that's one of the most detailed. He starts stuttering. He's like, all of a sudden, this man who's so articulate,
together with everything,
and did presentations all over the planet because he was the best of the best. All of a sudden, he's like stuttering really bad.
Caught with his panties down. Yeah, he did. I have often wondered, Jimmy and I and our whole family sat in federal court while his dad was on trial in a case that involved a lot of money and involved crooks. And the lady who was in charge of this whole thing, BC, I won't say her name.
I still remember her name.
I do too. She hated your dad. And I have always wondered if she wasn't very aware of just from his body language, his nonverbal, everything, because he was not verbal at
Mm-mm.
all.
No. Nope.
Not at all. But if she didn't pick up on him as being an abuser, there is no other reason under the sun I could think of her. She just had a hatred for him.
Yeah.
A
She really
hatred
did.
for him. And I think when we are trained properly, we can really pick up on things. We truly can.
And some people pick that up intuitively.
Well, you
but,
have, obviously.
You know, and I think there's kind of a combination. I do think it can be taught. It may come a little bit more difficult than other people, where it just seems to come naturally. I do. I really think some people just have a natural inherent gift.
For sure.
And
Yes.
they can just read people really well.
Yes.
But it can be taught. And, you know, I
Right.
think you're right. I think I think that this district attorney knew the second she saw him.
I do too, Jimmy.
She just knew.
And
she could tell.
Just
It reminds me of
bristled.
Judge Judy. Judge Judy can tell within
Judge Judy,
second.
if you start saying, like, it was like, she'll go, don't you use that word, no like around me, no like. And as I'm listening to this video, I'm thinking, that's Judge Judy there.
Absolutely.
She can read people.
She can read them well.
She reads them, and she's right on. She is right on. So I think we can learn how to, you know, at least get a pretty doggone good feeling when someone is out and out lying to us.
Absolutely. And then the last thing under perception management is the non-linguistic verbal. And he gave the example of Nixon when Nixon was he's getting agitated and he's like tapping the side of the podium, and his voice just gets
Higher,
high-pitched.
an octave higher. Yeah.
So the non-linguistic verbal is a change in pitch, volume, or pace. And Nixon had all of those, and he was flat out lying through his teeth. And so he played the video clip, and you're like, holy cow. Like, you can clearly see he was just getting so
he was riled.
nervous and agitated and not very professional, not very presidential. And you can hear the increase in his pitch because
Right. He was rattled.
He's trying to give the perception that he has things under control when he didn't.
No, not at all.
So it's fascinating things. And, you know, I watched another video, and it said, it was another FBI guy, and I forget which department he worked in. I'm going to say criminal profiling. But he was saying, like, you have to be really trained and just have common sense, because he said, he gave an example. He said, I had this woman who, you know, she was being interrogated, and she was getting, he's like, I could just tell she was getting visibly nervous.
Agitated,
and like, you know, her breathing changed. And he's like, so all these physical clues are there. And he said, finally, I said, is there something that you want to tell me? And she said, oh, thank God you asked. She's like, my car's parked out front. She's like, I only had 2 coins. And she's like, I know I'm almost out of time, because she kept looking at her watch.
No.
She's like, I'm almost out of time, and I don't want to get a ticket.
No.
And he goes, oh, well, he dismissed her. He's like, go take care of it. And he's like, it turned out that somebody had stolen her ID, and she was falsely accused. And so her nerves were the parking meter. So he's like, you know, you have to use your brain, and you can't just look at the nonverbal clues and be like, you're lying, because in that case, she wasn't lying at all.
As I'm thinking about this, Jimmy, I'm thinking of how many of these high-profile preachers, ministers, pastors, have we watched after they've been caught in abusive situations where they are trying to proclaim their innocence, and how, you know, this was just a mistake and I'm so heartbroken about it.
Yep.
But if you use this profiling, you can pick up on things that they're doing and the way they say, and you can look and say, that man is lying through his teeth, just lying.
That's right. And I think there are 2 things that stick out whenever I hear things like that. One is that it's oversimplified, so that goes back to this the cognitive complexity. It's oversimplified.
Yep.
And it's over exaggerated. So
Yeah.
their love for people and all the good they do, and
Just the
it's this
tears coming
right.
down.
It's this
and
grandiose,
yeah.
and that goes into the perception management. They're trying to manage our perception of them,
Yeah.
and they talk about like how they just love the Lord, and they just they've done all this work and all the work that I've done for the church and the kingdom, and it's this over exaggerated. Because if that's true, like Jim Clemente says, just say the facts. You don't have to say, I want you to listen. What were all the things Clinton used? I want to say one thing. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. You're not going to say those things. You're just going to state the facts and be like,
yeah.
hey, I'm guilty.
Right.
I did it.
I think of your dad minimizing what he did, minimizing the abuse, minimizing it every single time. What I did, after all, is not that much.
Yep.
What I did would never be called abuse overseas.
Yeah, if it was in any other country, then the things I did,
Yeah.
there would be no problem with it.
Right. So there was this minimizing and then this grandiose, look at me, I'm teaching Bible classes while I'm in prison. I look at how many people I baptized, look how many years I spent in ministry. So there's the grandiose versus the minimalist, of his actions. And I think that's uniform in liars and especially abusers who are masterful liars.
Yeah,
they just are.
Because you're just going to say, I screwed up. And I think that's where repentance comes in too. I always say, like, listen to what people are saying, because repentance is not about just saying, oh, if I did anything to hurt you, I'm sorry.
Not that if is a, right.
What repentance does is it says, I'm sorry that and then you list
taking responsibility
what you did, and then
Yeah.
you take measures to never do it again.
Right. It's
really not that
This is such a
complicated.
good tie-in with learning how to spot the abuser, or at least putting you on high alert for that person as being an abuser.
Yeah. So I think one of the most effective things of these, even if you're not a real great people reader, I think honestly one of the most useful parts of all of this is the cognitive complexity. So asking very specific questions.
Yeah.
Well, wait, you said that you were here. What did you do that day? Well, I went out and went on a hike. All day? Yep, all day. Well, didn't you eat at any point? Didn't and you're peeling back those layers, and they get agitated with
You
that.
can almost feel the agitation because it's they get irritated. Why are you bugging me like this when I said what I did? I was gone all day. Or why are you bugging me? I put my arm around her in church while I was in front of everybody. I didn't mean anything by it. On and on like that. Oh,
Yeah. Our
screen
camera's
blinking?
glitching out.
Yeah.
Maybe that's our clue to wrap things up.
Oh, yeah. I saw that.
So anyway, I think these are really important. We'll link to that video of Jim Clemente. He's an awesome dude. He's I got to talk to him after he did his presentation. I just went. He was like, pull up a chair. I sat at his table, and like super down to earth guy, super laid back. I really, really enjoyed him, and he's brilliant. I mean, this guy's a really good profiler. And,
this is such valuable information. It's another tool in our pocket for helping prevent child abuse, or for believing when a child says that person did something bad to me. Too often, I think we brush it off because we didn't see it. We don't believe that person could ever do something directly to a child. We brush it off, but use these tools. That's why we give them to you. Put this in your pocket, in your tool belt, as another tool to use.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely very effective, and you don't have to work for the FBI to do some of these things, at least on a basic level. So, practice it. Find out who's lying.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for tuning into this episode, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. A special thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. Please help us get the word out by searching for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. Please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the rewards our patrons receive.